Welcome to our channel. Today, we'll explore a dramatic and almost unbelievable Reddit story. Imagine this. You send your parents $6,000 every month, yet they still call you a parasite. One video changes everything, leading you to cut ties and move into your luxury home. But the story doesn't end there. Just a few days later, your parents show up at your doorstep with suitcases in hand. Inside that house, a shocking twist awaits them. What happened? How do you deal with betrayal from your own family? Stay tuned to uncover this emotional story. My brother showed me a video of my parents at a family reunion calling me a parasite who could not live independently. Despite the fact that I had been giving them $6,000 every month, that video was the last straw. It led me to cut all ties with them and move permanently to my luxury house. A few days later, they broke into my house with their suitcases, clearly planning to stay. But when they entered, an unexpected surprise awaited them. My older sister, Kelly, had always been the star of the family. Our home was like a magnet for relatives. Aunties, uncles, and cousins swarmed our backyard like ants at a picnic, eager to taste Mom's famous barbecue and watch Kelly perform. The backyard became her stage, with its perfectly trimmed lawn and a large oak tree providing the ideal backdrop. Dad lit the grill, filling the air with the delicious aroma of sizzling meat, while Mom darted around, ensuring everyone had a drink in hand. "Amber, Cheryl," someone called Mom over the laughter. "Sing us a song, will you?" And in an instant, all attention turned to Kelly. She jumped onto a chair, her laughter ringing out and her eyes gleaming with excitement. With a dramatic clearing of her throat, she launched into her best rendition of My Heart Will Go On by Celine Dion. The adults went wild, clapping and cheering as though it were a real concert. Mom and Dad beamed with pride, and on more than one occasion, Dad wiped away a tear. Meanwhile, I lingered at the edge of the patio, trying to blend into the background. It wasn't that I didn't want to join in, I just couldn't. My singing sounded like a cat being chased, and the thought of speaking in public. Not a chance. Words would tangle in my mouth, leaving me stuttering, flushed, and humiliated. I overheard murmurs about how different I was from Kelly. My relatives, my parents, everyone made it painfully clear who the star of the family was. While Kelly attended dance classes, singing lessons, and art workshops, I was left to my own devices. But I didn't mind too much. I found solace in the dusty old books that lined our shelves. The only person who seemed to understand me was Aunt Teresa. She often found me hiding behind the garage or in the treehouse, my nose buried in a book. "What adventure are you on today, Anna?" she'd ask, sitting beside me. I'd look up, grateful for her presence. "Ancient Egypt," I'd reply, holding up the book's cover. Teresa would nod, her eyes brimming with kindness. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, girl. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those moments were my escape. A sanctuary where I didn't have to perform, where I could just be Anna, the quiet girl who loved books more than noisy family gatherings. But even those cherished moments with Aunt Teresa couldn't erase the sting of being overlooked. Every time Kelly won an award or mastered a new song, my parents showered her with gifts, new clothes, the latest gadgets. In contrast, I got hand-me-downs and a heavy dose of disappointment. School became my refuge. I wasn't popular, but I found a place where I could thrive. I soaked up every lesson like a sponge, always asking questions and seeking answers. After class, I'd approach teachers with more inquiries. "Mrs. Davis, could you explain osmosis again? I didn't quite get it." She'd smile, happy to help, and patiently go over it once more. When the teachers couldn't provide answers, I'd ask for book recommendations. My backpack was always crammed with extra reading material, and I'd stay up late devouring every word, determined to master each subject. By high school, my hard work paid off. I became the top student in my class. For the first time, I was the best at something. Yet as graduation approached, our home remained centered on Kelly. Mom was always by her side, helping her refine her college portfolio. "This campaign idea is brilliant, sweetheart," Mom said one evening, reviewing Kelly's work. I turned a blind eye to their praises and retreated to my room, burying myself in my studies. But one night, during yet another family dinner revolving around Kelly's college plans, I couldn't hold back any longer. "I'm going to college too," I announced. "I've been accepted. I want to study business management." The room fell silent before erupting in laughter. "Oh, darling," Mom said, wiping away a tear. "We don't have the money for that. You'll need to get a job after graduation. You're not as talented as your sister." Her words hit me like a slap. My chest tightened, but I managed to say, "I'm the top student in my class." I reached into my bag, pulling out a crumpled scholarship letter, trembling as I held it up. I protested, my face burning with anger. I ran up the stairs, grabbed my test paper, and slammed it hard on the dining table. Everyone froze, their eyes widening in astonishment. "Wow, I cannot believe it," Dad murmured. "When did this happen?" It has been going on for years, I answered furiously. Not that any of you noticed. Mom looked embarrassed but tried to defend herself. Is it not possible that some of us have noticed? Her attempt fell flat and Dad interrupted her. Look, nothing changes. We have spent all our savings on Kelly's education. There is nothing left for you, Anna. After you graduate, you will work at Cousin Gary's restaurant. I felt my chest tighten as I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding furiously. Once in my room, I collapsed onto my bed, sobbing until something inside me shifted and hardened. Fine, I thought. If they will not help me, I will find another way. I will show them. The following months were a whirlwind. Kelly left for college amid emotional goodbyes and proud hugs, while I threw myself into my studies, determined to stay at the top of my class. I began spending more and more time at Aunt Teresa's house. It became my sanctuary away from home. When I graduated, all I had were my diploma, an impeccable academic record, and a determination they could not take away. My family did not bother to show up to congratulate me. They were too busy helping Kelly prepare her portfolio for another big university project. I walked home with my diploma in hand, but no one noticed. That night, I made a decision. I was not going to depend on anyone else. If my family would not invest in me, I would. I started searching for scholarships, part-time jobs, and any opportunity to better myself. It was not glamorous. I worked in a restaurant washing dishes and later as a waitress. During the day, I studied on my own at the public library, reading everything I could about finance and investments. I wanted to understand how money worked, how wealthy people multiplied it, and why people like me barely scraped by. One day, while cleaning Aunt Teresa's house, I stumbled upon something that would change my life forever. While organizing some old boxes in the attic, I discovered a worn leather folder. Inside were old documents, stock certificates, and letters written by my grandfather. My hands trembled as I read through them. It turned out that my grandfather had left a small fortune in technology stocks in the name of his youngest granddaughter, me. The problem was that no one had ever told me. I checked the dates on the documents. If those stocks still existed, they were now worth much more than my family could have imagined. I sat on the attic floor, my heart pounding. Part of me was exhilarated by the discovery, but another part was seething with anger at the thought that my parents might have known about this inheritance and chosen not to tell me. That night, I could not sleep. The document sat on my bedside table as if staring back at me, demanding action. The next morning, I took the first bus to the city center and headed to a legal firm I had researched earlier. A young and enthusiastic lawyer, Mr. Alvarez, reviewed the documents with me. "These stocks are still valid and registered in your name," he said in a professional yet surprised tone. "We are talking about a considerable amount. Anna, if you want, I can help you claim them." My heart raced. "Yes, please," I replied, trying to maintain composure. As he outlined the legal steps, I felt a powerful mix of excitement and vindication. This was not just an opportunity. It was my ticket out of my family's contempt and a chance to prove my worth. Over the following weeks, I worked quietly with Mr. Alvarez to secure the inheritance. At home, I acted as if everything was normal. Mom kept pestering me about applying for a job at Cousin Gary's restaurant, while Dad mocked my afternoons at the library, dismissing them as daydreaming. Each remark stung, but I bit my tongue and used their indifference as fuel to keep going. Finally, the day came when my bank account displayed a figure I had never imagined seeing. The share certificates had been transferred, and their value was enough to change my life completely. However, I did not want to spend that money impulsively. I knew that, if I played my cards wisely, I could multiply it and ensure that I would never depend on anyone again. I decided to invest in myself and in something my family had never believed in, my ability to succeed on my own. My first step was to seek financial advice. I wanted to avoid making mistakes with this unique opportunity. I met with experts who explained how to diversify my investments and capitalize on the growth of technology companies. They also recommended investing in real estate, particularly in luxury properties that could generate passive income. With each decision, I felt increasingly confident that I was building something solid. Initially, this new world of investments felt overwhelming, filled with unfamiliar terms and strategies. However, I studied with the same dedication that had made me the top student in my class. Before long, my investments began to yield results, and my bank account grew more rapidly than I had imagined. Over time, I rented a small apartment in a modern building in the city center. It was modest compared to what I could afford, but I wanted to proceed step by step. I focused on my education and eventually enrolled in a business administration program at a renowned university, something my parents had dismissed as impossible. I undertook all of this without informing my family, but one day, as I reviewed the documents for another property I had acquired, I received an unexpected call from my younger brother. "Anna, you have to come home," he said. "Mom and Dad are saying you have abandoned them." I remained silent for a few seconds, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "What more do they expect from me?" I replied coldly. "I gave them everything I had, and it was never enough." My brother tried to mediate, but I knew it was time to sever ties completely. After that call, I decided it was time to face the situation head-on. I returned home for the first time in months, not to seek reconciliation, but to make things clear once and for all. When I arrived, my mother was sitting in the living room, going through some papers, while my father watched television as if nothing had happened. Both of them looked surprised to see me, but their expressions quickly shifted to a mixture of discomfort and feigned concern. "So, you finally decided to disappear," my mother said in a dry tone. "We have been worried." I could not help but laugh sarcastically. "Worried? Really? Because all I hear is that you call me a parasite behind my back," I replied, crossing my arms. My father scoffed, muttering something about misinterpreting things, but I had not come to argue. "I am here for the last time, and I want you to know something. I don't owe you anything. If at any point I gave you money, it was out of respect, but that respect died the day you chose to ignore my achievements." Their faces hardened, especially my mother's. "Don't talk like that," she said, as if she still had control over me. Ignoring her, I pulled a folder from my bag and placed copies of my inheritance documents on the table. "Do you recognize this?" I asked, throwing the papers down. Their eyes widened as they read the documents. "This is from my grandfather," my father murmured, disbelief evident in his voice. "Exactly, and it turns out he left this in my name. I wonder why you never mentioned it to me." My mother tried to justify their actions, claiming they thought it was unimportant or that they had forgotten. But I knew they were lying. Their excuses could not erase the fact that they had deliberately tried to hide something that rightfully belonged to me. "It does not matter. I have already solved it, and they no longer have control over me or my future," I said firmly. Their expressions shifted from surprise to panic, but I did not care. I stood up and headed toward the door. "Enjoy what you have, because I am not going to look back." Those were my last words before leaving, and it was the last time I crossed the door of that house. From that moment, my life took a completely different course. With the inheritance I had claimed, I expanded my investments in assets, real estate, and technological companies. Soon, the income I generated exceeded any expectation I had ever imagined. I bought my first luxury house, a modern property with enormous windows, an infinity pool, and panoramic views of the city. Every detail of the house reflected how far I had come, from the minimalist furniture to the luxury cars parked at the entrance. I remember that when I received the keys, I felt both relieved and determined. This house was not just a symbol of success, but also of independence, of everything I had built without anyone's help. A few months later, while I was settling into my new life, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as I returned from a meeting with my financial advisors, I found my parents and my brother waiting at my door with suitcases in hand. I froze for a moment, watching them in disbelief. My mother was the first to speak. "Anna, sweetheart, we came to stay with you for a while. You know, the house is old and we need a change of scenery," she said in a tone that attempted to sound affectionate but was laced with condescension. My father, on the other hand, said nothing, avoiding direct eye contact with me. My brother wore a neutral expression, as though unsure how to react. A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony of the situation, but another part was filled with anger at seeing them attempt to reinsert themselves into my life after having ignored me for so many years. I decided I would not let them get away with it so easily. Keeping my composure, I opened the door and allowed them to enter with their suitcases as if everything was fine. My mother immediately began commenting on how beautiful the house was, while my father inspected every corner with curiosity. "Wow, this is impressive," he murmured, still avoiding addressing me directly. My mother, wasting no time, sat down on one of the white leather sofas and exclaimed, "We always knew you would be someone important, Anna. You carry it in your blood." I bit my lip to stop myself from responding immediately, but the anger was simmering inside me. I let them settle in, pretending their comments did not affect me, while inwardly I planned how to teach them a lesson they would never forget. Once they were comfortable, I sat in front of them in the elegant living room, crossing my legs and looking at them directly. "So what should I do with this surprise visit?" I asked with a fake smile. My mother attempted to soften the situation. "We just thought that since you have so much space, we could stay for a while, you know, to be closer as a family." I could not help but laugh, though not in the way they expected. "Family? Now we are a family?" I said, leaning forward. Because the last time I checked, I was just a parasite to you. Is that not right? Their faces changed instantly. My father scratched his head, looking uncomfortable, while my mother tried to protest, claiming it had been a misunderstanding. I cut her off. I do not need your explanations. What I need is for you to understand something. This house, this success, none of this has anything to do with you. I built all of this on my own, and I have no intention of sharing it with those who were not there for me when I needed them. The silence in the room was almost tangible. My mother looked at my father, seeking support, but he avoided my gaze as if unsure of what to say. Finally, my mother broke the silence. Anna, you cannot be so hard on us. We are your parents. And everything we did was for the good of the family. I felt the anger rising in my chest again, uncontrollable and raw. For the good of the family? I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. And where was that good when you excluded me from everything? When you decided I wasn't worth investing in? Or when you spent everything on Kelly and left nothing for me? My voice cracked at the end, not from sadness, but from pure, unfiltered anger. Everything I have now is thanks to me. You didn't do anything to help. You didn't even support me emotionally. My brother, who had been silent until that point, finally spoke up. Anna, I understand why you're upset, but we're your family. We all make mistakes. I looked him directly in the eye, my gaze a mix of disappointment and defiance. Mistakes, yes. But some mistakes have permanent consequences, I replied coldly. And the consequence of your decisions is that I learned to live without you. Now I have my own life, and I'm not going to carry anyone else's burden again. I stood up from the sofa and motioned toward the door. You can stay tonight because I'm not cruel, but tomorrow I expect you to find somewhere else to go. There's no room for you here anymore. My mother tried to protest, but my decision was unshakable. I left the room, leaving them to sit with the weight of their own mistakes. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling back to all those moments when they made me feel invisible, insufficient. But I also remembered how far I had come, how each of those wounds had fueled my drive to build a life of my own. At dawn, I heard faint noises coming from the living room. I looked over the stairs and saw my parents packing their things in silence. My mother muttered something under her breath, but I didn't care enough to try to understand. My father, on the other hand, looked defeated, as if he finally understood that the dynamics between us had changed forever. As they were leaving, my brother paused at the door and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. This didn't have to be like this, he said quietly before stepping outside. I closed the door behind them without a word. For the first time in days, the house felt calm. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, taking a deep breath and letting the silence settle around me. I knew I had made the right decision, but that didn't make the emotional weight any easier to carry. Determined not to let those feelings define me, I grabbed my laptop and checked my emails, focusing on the next big steps in my life. There was a promising project I had been researching, a commercial property in the city center with incredible potential. I was also considering buying a luxury car, not because I needed it, but because I wanted a tangible reminder of how far I had come. As I mapped out my plans, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: satisfaction. Not from the money or material possessions, but from the freedom of regaining my power and control over my life. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Teresa. Her voice was calm, but there was a tone of curiosity beneath the surface. Anna, I heard what happened with your parents, she said. I don't blame you, but I wanted to know if you're okay with everything. Her frankness surprised me, but it was also a relief to speak with someone who had always been honest with me. I'm fine, Aunt, I replied sincerely. I did what I had to do. I couldn't let them take advantage of me anymore. There was a brief pause before she spoke again. You know, she began, I always knew you were different. You didn't need the applause Kelly craved because you had something more. Determination. Your grandfather saw it too. That's why he left everything to your name. Her words lingered in my mind, reminding me that despite everything, someone had always believed in me. That conversation reignited a spark of purpose. I decided to move forward with a new goal, to honor the trust my grandfather and Aunt Teresa had placed in me. I began planning to transform one of the properties I had acquired into a community center for young people, a space where they could learn financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and technology skills, the very things I had to figure out on my own. At first, the idea seemed ambitious, almost overwhelming. But with the contacts I had made and the capital I had built, I knew it was more than possible. It was necessary. I worked on the plans day and night, reviewing every detail. I wanted this place not only to be a learning space, but also a source of inspiration. When the center finally opened, it was an exciting day. I cut the ribbon in front of a crowd of eager young people, and while I looked at their faces full of hope, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was creating something that truly mattered. The success of the community center was immediate. Young people from all over the world began attending the programs. Some were interested in learning how to manage money. Others were dreaming of starting their own businesses. One day, while I was reviewing the progress of a group of students who were working on technology projects, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my mother. I hesitated for a moment before answering, but I eventually picked up. Her tone was different, less authoritarian and more vulnerable. "Anna," she said slowly, as if she were choosing each word carefully, "I found out what you are doing with the center. It is admirable." I was surprised by the fulfillment her words gave me, but I also felt defensive. "What do you want, Mom?" I answered, without trying to hide my distrust. There was a silence before she continued. "I just wanted to tell you that I am proud of you," she said. But it did not sound like the words she truly wanted to say. I did not know how to feel after that call. Part of me wanted to believe that she was sincere, but another part could not ignore the damage she had caused to everyone. I decided not to engage more than necessary. I focused on my work, making sure that the center would continue to grow and help more people. Over time, the earnings generated by my investments and the properties I had acquired allowed me to expand the project. I opened a second center in another city, and shortly after, I began to receive recognition for my social impact. Interviews on television and articles in magazines described my story as an example of resilience and success. However, every time someone asked me about my family, I responded cautiously. It was not easy, but I learned that success does not always have to do with the approval of others, I said, leaving aside the distance I still maintained with them. Shortly after, I received an invitation to give a lecture at a prestigious university. They wanted me to talk about my career, how I went from being ignored by my family to building an empire and giving something back to the community. While I was writing my speech, I relived every moment, from the tears of frustration to the small victories that brought me to where I was. The day of the lecture, the auditorium was full. I stood in front of the microphone with the spotlight illuminating the stage and spoke from the heart. Success is not measured only by money or the titles you accumulate, but by what you decide to do with them, I began. I told them how I faced rejection, how I found strength in the darkest moments, and how every decision I made was intended to prove that I could achieve even when others did not believe in me. At the end of the event, while greeting some students, I saw a familiar figure at the back of the auditorium. It was my father. For a second, our eyes met, and I could see something in his gaze that I had not seen before. Regret. He did not come to speak to me, but he did not need to. I knew that, deep down, he understood how much he had lost by not supporting me. That night, back home, I reflected on how ironic it all was. Those who once called me a parasite now looked on from a distance, admiring what I had achieved. I did not need their approval, but that little spark of recognition in their eyes was enough to close the chapter of resentment that had lingered within me for years. Over time, I learned to let go of the emotional burden that my family had represented for so many years. I did not hate them, but I did not need their presence to feel complete. My life was now full of purpose, with each decision focused on helping others find their way, just as I had done. My community centers were still growing, and every time I saw a young person take their first step toward success, I felt that every struggle had been worth it. One night, while I was reviewing the financial balance and the new projects I would invest in, I remembered Aunt Teresa, her soft voice and her words of encouragement. I realized that she had been the first ray of hope in my life, the first person to believe in me when no one else did. That same week, I dedicated one of my centers to her memory, a small gesture to honor her impact on my life. Now, looking back, I understand that it was not the money or possessions that gave me the satisfaction I had sought, but the freedom to be true to myself. My mansion, the luxury cars at the entrance, and the successful investments were reminders of how far I had come, but they did not define my happiness. What truly mattered was the legacy I was building and the positive impact it left on others. Sometimes I received messages from my mother or my brother, and although I read them, I rarely responded. My life had taken a course they had never imagined, and I was not interested in going back to the past. In the end, I learned that my value did not depend on their validation, but on what I decided to build with my own hands. And that, more than any inheritance, was my true triumph.